Morning's gospel story from Mark's gospel is a challenging one. Sometimes Jesus says things that give comfort. Other times he says things that are difficult, things that challenge us, that unsettle us, that invite us or force us to reorient our lives or the way we see the world. I think our gospel story this morning is one of those stories. It all begins with Jesus asking his disciples a pretty straightforward question. Who do people say that I am? Who do people say that I am? It seems that there's been some confusion about this. Some people have been saying that he's John the Baptist. Others have been saying that he's the prophet Elijah, or maybe one of the other prophets come back to life. After this, Jesus asks the disciples what they think about him. Who do you say that I am? He wants to know. Who do you say that I am? And Peter, of course, as always, without missing a beat, says, "You are the Messiah. You are the Messiah." Of course, it's the right answer, but we quickly realize that Peter has no idea, actually, what that really means, what it means for Jesus to be the Messiah. And of course, it's not what he was expecting. You see, the Messiah was someone first century Jewish people, including probably the disciples, had been eagerly awaiting. They had been living under Roman occupation for nearly 100 years, and the Romans could be oppressive and cruel. People believed that the Messiah would come and save them from all of this. Messiah literally means anointed one who is anointed just as kings are anointed with oil. And what people, including Peter, were expecting was a Messiah who would probably come and reign over them like an earthly king, a powerful political figure who would come with great might and deliver them. So when Peter calls Jesus the Messiah, this is probably the kind of Messiah that he imagines Jesus will be. So you can imagine why Peter is confused and even angry when Jesus starts talking about how he's going to have to undergo great suffering, how he's going to be rejected, how he's even going to be killed. Suffering, rejection, death. These don't sound very much like the Messiah that Peter has been expecting. This is not what he had signed up for when he said he would follow Jesus either. It certainly didn't make for a very good branding, and it wasn't a very viable recruitment strategy. Peter is so frustrated with Jesus for saying all these things that he takes him aside and he rebukes him. But then, right after that, it's Jesus who rebukes Peter for missing the mark, for missing the very reason why he's called the disciples to follow him in the first place. Even calling Peter Satan and scolding him for setting his mind on human things instead of divine things. After this, Jesus says some of the most difficult things that he said in all the Gospels. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. Like so often, these are not the words that I would have chosen for us today. In this season when summer is coming to a close, the season when we're trying to regather and perhaps even to welcome people to church after being separated for so long. These are not exactly welcoming words, at least not on the surface. And part of me really empathizes with Peter telling Jesus just to be quiet, shut up, don't say those things. But the more I thought about it this week, the more it dawned on me that what Jesus says in today's gospel might be exactly what we need to hear during this time. In fact, of all the things that Jesus ever said, the things that he says to us today are among the most important. Because these words about denying ourselves and taking up our cross and losing our lives for the sake of the gospel, these words are at the very heart of discipleship, of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And that is what church is supposed to be about, right? This is the place. This is the community of love, the school of love, where we practice being disciples, where we learn to be disciples, where we try and become more fully and faithfully disciples of Jesus. So what does this look like exactly? What does it look like for us to lose our lives for the sake of the gospel? I mean, does it mean that we're meant to go out and die, as Jesus did? Does it mean that we have to become martyrs? I suppose for some of us, it might mean that. Once you start following Jesus, you never quite know where your life will take you. Because, of course, one of the truths about following Jesus is that the minute you follow Jesus, your life is no longer your life. And for many fellow Christians in some parts of the world, persecution and even the threat of death are a daily part of the way they live out their faith. But without spiritualizing Jesus' words in our gospel today, I also think that just as important as being willing to lose our lives for the gospel in death is being willing to lose our lives for the sake of the gospel while we're still here, while we're still alive, while we go about our daily lives every day, every moment. As I was reading this gospel story this week, I was reminded of an old parishioner of mine in my last congregation on the East Coast who taught me something about what it looks like to lose your life for the sake of the gospel. Her name was Ruth Porter. She was in her late 80s when I got to know her. She was one of the parish matriarchs. And although she never lorded this over anybody, she had been teaching Sunday school for over 50 years. At the time I met her, she was dealing with loss in nearly every corner of her life. Her beloved husband had died just a few months before I got there. And now, because she was becoming increasingly frail and less financially stable, she had to move out of the house where she had lived for nearly half a century into a small apartment in a public housing complex for seniors. Many of her belongings she had to sell or get rid of. Soon after this, she had to give up driving, and she found herself having to live a much more limited life than she had ever been used to. As the years went by, her health began to decline more and more and more too. Her congestive heart failure worsened. She began losing weight, and it seemed like she spent more time in the hospital than she did at home. And yet here was the remarkable thing about Ruth. Her response to her diminishment and to her suffering wasn't to turn inward or to hunker down or to hold on tight to what little life she had left. Her response actually was the complete opposite of that. It was to give more and more of herself and her life away You would have thought that she would have retired from teaching Sunday school. 50 years is a long time. You would have thought that she would have become a shut-in, as they used to be called. But instead, she insisted on continuing to teach, showing up every week and dressing to the nines, even when memorizing godly play Sunday school lessons and getting to church on Sunday mornings took so much more effort than they used to. In fact, in her 90s, she decided that she wanted to start teaching adult Sunday school too, and she put together a class on the history of the church. In spite of her age, Ruth was also unapologetic about her love of men, especially younger men, especially Tom Selleck, but that's another story. Just before Michael and I moved to Seattle, she took us out to dinner one evening at one of the nicest Italian restaurants in the city, despite her very fixed income. It seemed that Ruth had decided that what little money she had, what little health, what little life, all of these were to be given away. I think this is what it means to lose one's life for the sake of the gospel. To live in such a way that we aren't afraid to give our lives away. Now, this is not the way of the world. Most of us are taught to hold on to what we have, to hoard our lives like their private treasure, especially when things seem scarce. But the way of Jesus is a different way. The call of Jesus is a different call. It's a call to live our lives like Ruth lived hers, in such a way that makes us radically available to God and to others. It's a call to wake up every day and to say, okay, God, here I am. Here's my life. It might not seem like I have a lot to offer, but what I have to offer, I offer. It's a call to live our lives not with clenched fists or, far worse, clenched hearts, but with hands and hearts that are wide open to one another and to God. For in the end, it's only the heart that is wide open, and from which love is extravagantly poured out, that God can come and fill.